Hello and welcome to Anne and Steve Talk Stuff. This is episode 38 of an economist and an artist walking into a podcast and talking about odd things that make the world go round. Happy New Year, Stephen.
Happy New Year, Anne. It's 2021.
Yes.
2020 was a hell of a year.
Hell of a year.
I think 2021 is going to be a remarkable year. Yeah, we're going to see progress of a kind that, in the last 10 years maybe we haven't seen. So it's going to be an exciting year. It's going to be a tough year. I think in the usual football commentator thing, a game of two halves, like if last year was the crisis, this year is the recovery. So like when you're in recovery from something, you don't feel particularly great, like if you had surgery on your knee and you're in recovery from it, it's not like I'm going to go to a dance now, like it's not that, but things are going to get better this year. And for a lot of people, and I think because of where we're at with the statistics currently spiking and all that, there's a kind of a fatalism, I told youism, all that coming out. The reality is just keep the chin up for another couple of months. By the time we get to I guess if we're still doing weekly episodes, it'll be episode 47. Okay. Right, so episode 47, right? We'll hit the end of March, and that'll be quite interesting. From just to look back and be like, okay, so started 2020, 5,000 cases a week, less than 25,000 vials of the vaccine in the country.
Yeah.
End of March 2020. What are we looking like?
21.
Shit, still doing nothing. Still doing nothing, right? Still doing nothing, Do you do that where you instead of writing like your birthday, you go like, send me the book, 2020. I do that all the time because right now we're in a kind of a contract review. It's part of the year. We kind of review contracts and stuff. And like twice today, somebody sent it back to me going, "You were not born 4 months ago, Steve." So.
I like it. It's a funny thing that I have about this year, which I did put a tweet out at some point. So when I was growing up, and when you were growing up, because we know we are the same age, years were always like three syllables with the exemption of the seven. So like it was always 85 or 88 or 89 or 92 or 94. As I said, then you 97 or whatever, 87. But it was always just the second number. You rarely said 19. And since the turn of the new century, it's been 2000, 2001, or 2011 and that. And even then it was 2020. Yeah. I feel we can go back to 21. We can go back to the 3-syllable description of a year and refer to the year just by the number. And that's what I'm looking forward to. That's a bit of a throwback to better times in my head. It's completely loose. It's made of on no fact, which is what I bring to the show. But that's something I'm excited about, is just referring to this year by the second number rather than adding in the 20 or the 2000. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
When Michael Noonan was Minister for Finance and he was standing up in the Dáil, he clearly had a thing about the third syllable. Like it clearly really annoyed him. So he would say things like, and in 213, where, and it's like, well, it is not the year 213, Michael, but he clearly went, I'm not giving you that third syllable.
Yes.
Where austerity calls for, that for, and it was good. He was a very distinctive finance minister, and that was one of his. It was quite endearing. I think one day he gave the budget, and he had a really bad cold.
Oh yeah.
And he's, I wouldn't call him elderly, but he was certainly getting on for years, and he just seemed really kind of under the weather. And the whole country, like, he delivered a massively austere budget, took money out of everyone's pocket, and the whole country was like, "Are you okay?" Is he all right? People were like offering him, like, around the budget time, I kind of do this. when things were normal, I would go up to Dublin and do like radio shows and stuff.
Mhm.
You kind of meet him 2 or 3 times in the day, and people be coming up to him, like honey and lemsips and stuff. Going, "You're right, Minister," there, and I thought it was very nice, that people were moving to mind the lad in this. Not in a "Oh, he's the minister, we have to be nice to him," just in a like, there's a guy, he's not in great shape, we better
mind him.
actually, in fairness, also given the job he was doing for the country at the time, you wouldn't want him taken to the bed, like.
No, we
No.
no sick days.
No sick days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think something we ought to also acknowledge is it is obviously January. And we haven't we're back after our little holiday break. And I don't know about you, Stephen, but I spent a lot of the festive period on the couch eating sweets, drinking drinks, and watching the latest offerings. Are like maybe like I one day I got all three Back to the Futures in.
Wow.
Yeah. And then there's
Talk about like a decreasing quality of the day, like
very
by the end, were
true.
you just kind of going, just die, Marty McFly?
Well, 3 is really just a tie-er upper. It's not really a film, but
No.
it was lots of fun. And then I watched so a lot of shows dropped over the Christmas period on Netflix and things like that. And we're going to talk a little bit about stuff that was released, and there's a bit of a comparative thing. I'm going to be honest, there was a show called Bridgerton, which dropped on Netflix, and I just said, I'll just put on the first episode. And 2 days later, I had watched it.
And 2 days later,
I had watched it
like they turned on a light bulb in your head, and you were like, and that, I think I. What did you think of it, first off?
Well, it was a bit of a show to leave your brain at the door a bit. It was like I watched another show called Gossip Girl. I really bring the intellectualism to this podcast, and it was pretty much Gossip Girl in early 1800 England. What I did like about it was they took this decision to kind of, it was explained in the show, but ultimately to cast racially blind. So you had people of color in period costumes in positions of dukedom or the queen and that, and this was, it was a bit of a parallel universe, so it wasn't historical, it was
no.
at all. And there was a point where a few episodes in they said, well, remember the king married basically one of us, meaning a person of color, and that changed things for us. And I mean, I think it would have taken a lot more than that to change a society. It would have taken a number of generations. But I liked the fact that you're looking at people in wigs and costumes of all stratas of society in England, and they are of all colors and of all ethnicities. And what I found was, it was weird the first episode, and then I just stopped seeing it, and I was like, oh, this is actually quite healthy, because if we don't see people of color in roles other than very specific things, it just reinforces really negative things in society. So that was a positive thing. It was absolute fluff, absolute nonsense, ridiculously watchable. But I am an Irish person watching this stuff, and I think also I had to leave. Growing up watching this kind of stuff anyway, I leave a bit of my national awareness at the door, because there was no Irish characters in it, and so that was my take. It was Nicola Coughlan was in it, a great one of the Derry Girls, a great Irish actress. Great to see her do a turn about the room. But I mean, it's absolute nonsense. So that would be, but I did like the challenge of racial norms with that. So how about you, Stephen? What did you think of it? More importantly.
So first off, we have to talk a little bit about priming.
Yes.
Right. So priming is a psychological phenomenon. And basically, so you expose the subject to one stimulus, and then that influences the response to the subsequent stimulus, right? So if you prime someone, um, like for example, you have a word like nurse, and then you ask somebody to, you say the word nurse, and then you say free associate. After that, 9 times out of 10, the next word that comes out of anyone's mouth is doctor, right? Or you go, you say bread, and then the next thing somebody else will say is smell, something like that, and so you can actually force the choices that somebody makes into a much smaller set than they had previously thought about. And that's how a lot of magic works. Actually, magic works by priming you.
Kind of
And that's
Darren
how
Brown I was thinking of.
yeah, a lot of it is priming, and it's really good because like you can positively, negatively, associatively, repetitively prime someone, and you can prime animals. It's a whole thing, right? And we use it all the time in making opinions about people. So you meet somebody and you're primed before you meet them, like you're talking about someone's ethnicity, for example. You're primed by just the years that you spent hearing about them or reading about them or whatever, right? So there's a priming thing. So what happened to me in watching Bridgerton was just a really strong priming. And so what I did was I didn't set out to do this. I didn't I spent like you, I spent most of the Christmas period on the couch or doing long walks with the kids, one or the other. And normally we spent like a couple of days on the couch and just in sort of exasperation, we're like, we're going for a walk. And we go for like 4-hour walk.
Yeah.
Nuts. The kids are like, no, Dad. You're dragging them around and whatever. Anyway, so I decided, because I hadn't had time to watch it, I decided to watch The Hunger, which is a 2-part documentary on RTE about the Great Famine. So like the narrative starts in 1841 and basically takes you up to 1852. So it's kind of a 9-10 year sort of period. And like what it does is it takes you through the Irish experience of the Great Famine, and it compares it to the experience on the continent. So richer countries like France and Belgium, they also had the potato blight, and they had hundreds of thousands of people die. It was very unpleasant for them, of course, but they didn't have a famine in the way that we had a famine, right? And so they really were careful. They were careful not to call it a genocide, which is if you have talk about the famine online, somebody with like 12 followers who's tweeted 3 times will come back and say, hello, I'm a right-wing bot, and it was in fact a genocide, right? Or you will have people say, well, no, it's actually the decisions that were made by the authorities at the time, who were English, contributed enough to the destruction of the Irish nation that in fact it can be considered genocide, which is the trying to wipe out another people. And there was a historian on there who talked about it being not genocide but genoslaughter. In other words, they didn't intend to either to kill 1 million people, stop 400,000 people from being born, and have 2 million people emigrate, devastate a language, devastate a population, destroy several cultures, in fact not just one. They didn't set out to do that, but that is what their decisions brought on the people, and it was very hard. And I'd actually studied the economics of famine in college with a guy called Cormac O'Grada, who's probably the world authority, not just on the Irish famine, but on famines across the world. And he was interviewed a few times for the piece. He's got an amazing book called "Eating People is Wrong." It's a comparative history of famine. It's tough reading, but it's all about cannibalism in famines. The people think about economists as studying the most boring things, and we so don't, right? But what's fascinating about it is it's like 150, 106 years later. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would say I am 6 generations away, maybe 7 generations away from the famine.
Yeah.
So it's quite a while, it's quite a while. And my family, my ancient family, much of it is from, Dublin and Wexford. So actually, the areas that were most spared by the famine, you know, and
Okay.
so it's absolutely the case. Like very large amounts of my family did not have to emigrate. Obviously,
Mm.
they didn't die, because you and I are here, right?
Yeah.
But it is very interesting. And three things were clear from the piece. The first is that when called upon to do so, the British taxpayer and the British government decided not to fund relief works in Ireland. Now, remember, Ireland was part of Britain at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the idea was that they were not going to incentivize overproduction of people, effectively,
Okay.
that the only way they would give food is by workhouses and public works and this kind of thing. And you could still see, particularly if you go down, I go down to East Cork a fair bit where my mum is, you can still see famine walls there, like 9 foot walls built 150 years ago by starving people. And it's like, I'm always kind of shook by it, because I'm relatively young, I'm relatively fit, I'm definitely well fed, and I don't think I could build that wall. And you
Yeah.
just imagine starving men, women, and children
And
trying to build it.
sorry, and this is
Yeah.
as someone who I actually did history to Leaving Cert, and I'm a terrible. I don't know, I'm probably a pretty average member of the public who watched Bridgerton but didn't watch The Hunger. And I was gonna watch it for the episode, and I went, "Do you know what? I'm gonna bring my ignorance to Stephen and see how he feels." So the famine wall. What for anyone uninitiated? What is the famine wall?
Oh, so there were famine walls, there were famine roads. The basic idea was, particularly in the early years of the famine, we couldn't possibly give these starving people food for nothing,
Right.
right? We can't just give them food. Well, they eventually did give them food in soup kitchens for a while, but they said no. If you want money for things, then you're going to have to do something for it. And the something was roads to nowhere, huge high walls, digging out ditches, reframing the land. You can still see, like, they had these amazing aerial shots. You can still see where the land is. It has been sort of riveted out because of either potato tilling, or just by the works that these people had to do. And a lot of them are kind of
Mm.
still around. So that's what those famine walls were. They were literally public work for starving people. And then uh, other things that happened during the thing. So you had lots of people who were starving, who just couldn't make ends meet. The ones who could afford to emigrated. So if you had something, you left, and there were things called weeping bridges. And if you're interested in this, there's an amazing podcast called the Irish History Podcast. It's a brilliant guy called Finn. He describes um, uh, uh, what are called weeping bridges,
Okay.
bridges of tears, and literally when the whole village would walk up with you, you would have a big party. It would be a wake
Mm.
almost, and you would have a party, or you have a gathering, and then you would leave, and you would like walk across this bridge and like never see these people again, like ever. Like you would say goodbye to your mother, your father, your brothers, your friends, the entire community. You would leave. You might send money back, hopefully, but like you might not. And this sort of trauma, I think it's worth calling it trauma, because the 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 damage of it, the intentional damage, I think is important as well. Like we're quite used to policymakers, here kind of not doing the best job, but
Mm.
not actively going, you know what, screw those people in Munster.
Yeah.
Like that doesn't really happen here. I mean,
Mm.
I think it does. Yeah, it also kind of shows. Anyway, to make a long story short, there were loads of these policies that said make poor people, starving people work harder, force them to emigrate. The poorest of the poor couldn't emigrate; didn't have the money to go, so they just had to stay there. They died in ditches. The entire all of society broke down. Like there were murders, stabbings. People would rob anything from anyone else just because they were starving. The only place where those kind of degenerative kind of social norms or social order issues where I've come across that before is like when there's a war or in like descriptions of the concentration camps, where people just are so hungry the usual stuff just falls away.
I remember somebody once saying to me, "We're all 9 meals away from being cavemen. Like 3 days without food and water, things will break down."
Or in my case, Twitter. But yeah, I mean, you're
well,
right.
it's funny actually. Just while you're explaining that, the whole weeping bridge thing. I remember in the last number of years, a lot of the recent generation who had to emigrate because of the downturn, and there was a lot of reference to the Irish wakes. There was a lot of reference to people in their 20s and early 30s moving to Canada, Australia, wherever, and having parties, and they were calling them Irish wakes, and I think it was a throwback to that
exactly
to that time.
Exactly. These ideas, the idea of these bridges of tears and all that, like that infrastructure is still there. It's still within our songs, still within our culture. But if you think about the policy decisions, the UK said, right, we're not going to give these starving people just straight up food until they had to. And even then they weren't able to do it for that long. Their domestic politics, the domestic politics were like, we're not allowing our taxes to go up. And then remember that Ireland was owned by a class of absentee landlord. And those absentee landlords had rates levied upon them. Now, obviously, the rates that were levied upon them, nobody was paying them, because there was a famine. Nobody, the subsistence crop was potatoes, so nobody was paying any of those rates. And so, at a certain point, there was a decision by the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Lord Trevelyan, he of the corn. We still Trevelyan's corn, yeah, that lad. There was a decision that any further relief for the Irish population were going to come from the landlords, unless, and there was a particular landlord from Galway who was an MP as well, who got them to change the law in the House of Commons such that if people didn't pay, they got kicked off the land. So in other words, we're going to save our money from you. So the starving people who have seen their society break down, their cultures destroyed, are then forced off the land by these landlords, right? And like who some of whom continue to prosper today, right? Their assets are still there, their families are still there, it's all working out for them, Very interestingly, so I live, as you know, out in Maru, and there were 2 landlords here, and I actually looked up the historical record for the landlords that were here. One was the Barteringtons, the people who built Glenstone Abbey.
And the Barringtons, like Barrington Street in Limerick, and
like
all
Barrington
that?
Hospital.
Yeah, okay.
The Barringtons were amazing people, by the way. Amazing people. Do you like doing graveyard tours, by the way?
Yeah, sure.
Love a good graveyard tour, but there's an amazing graveyard down here in Maru, and it has a grave on it. In it, there was a lady called Winifred Barrington, and we should actually devote a podcast to this woman's life. She died during the War of Independence. She was mistakenly shot, and because she was wearing the cap of an RIC person, and like she literally was wearing it for the crack, and someone shot her. She died.
Boy.
And,
okay. But you said the Barringtons are right by you in Maroon.
Yeah. So well, they were, and actually, it was her death that precipitated the Barringtons leaving. That her dad was never able to get over it, and when you trace the history back a little while, you see why. So, but anyway, her grave has this beautiful inscription on it: "Here lies all that can die, of Winifred Barrington." It's just an amazing.
Wow.
Yeah,
because they were very what's the word?
Very progressive, very forward. They brought rugby and statistics to Ireland. They brought public health to Ireland.
Yeah.
There's a Barrington Prize. It's every year for the Statistical and Social Inquiry Society,
Mm-hmm.
named in honor of one of the Barringtons. Like they're an amazing family. But
Mm.
to their genuine eternal credit, not only did they give their abbey over to the monks of Glenstall eventually, they didn't evict anyone from their lands.
Right.
And another landlord here similarly. And I heard somebody about 2 years ago, like completely, and this probably, you know, somebody complete like a farmer said, "Do you know, Stephen?" And he didn't give me any of the detail. He went, "There's the Barringtons were always very good to the people here," and I was like, "What do you mean?" And he said you can go back a long way, and every generation. Oh, it was a great phrase. He went, "The further back you go, the more decency you find."
Wow.
That's what he said. And I was like, wow, okay. And that's true. And for the Barringtons and the other, I think Kilcrony, the other landlord, neither of them evicted people during the famine,
Right.
to their eternal credit. So anyway, we finished watching this 2-part series, right? And I have to say, I think the only verb I would describe myself as like fizzing with anger.
Right. Yeah.
Like I know this stuff, and like I studied it 20 years ago. But I was so pissed off when I went to bed. I was just like, you know. And then my wife, the eternal optimist, said, "Don't worry, I have this to show you. It'll be grand. Tomorrow we're not going to watch this hardcore historical, economic, political stuff. We're going to watch nice, fluffy stuff. It's called Bridgerton." I said, grand. What's it about? So beautiful people kissing each other and, you know, being sad. And then being happy again. I said, great. Who are these people? Absentee landlords. I said, right, what? Okay, sure, cool, great. And so you have these kind of absolutely, I think it's fair to say, that they're gorgeous.
Ridiculous.
Hot-looking people.
Pack of hotties.
They're very pretty. All these people are very pretty.
Yeah.
You know, yes, very pretty people. And their biggest problem in life is like, will I get married? You know, and it's very, very awfully, and they love the titles, and the Lord and the Duke and the Duchess and Your Majesty and all this. And like, I think the show is cleverly done in that it's clearly going, lads, you know, this isn't literally just a bunch of rich Americans playing dress up. Like, that's what this is. Like, it's not, you know, we're not going for historical accuracy here, as you can see. Right?
Yeah.
Right. And they have these like lovely bits where they go to a ball and you hear like Billie Eilish playing in the background or something, you know, and you're like, it's kind of their way of going, we get it. We know why you're here.
String quartet arrangements. It should be clarified.
Yeah. Oh, it's beautiful. It was really well done. And so I was like, still kind of annoyed, you know, but I could kind of get over it. Right. I could kind of get over it because there's a moment where one of the characters is brought by another character down to like see the poor people who are like all encrusted in dirt and all this, and she was like, you know, living with the pigs, and you know, she said, oh, you know, this is the life that you want, you know, and it was like, make a choice to get married to somebody you don't love, or poorly, be really poor and have a crap life. Like, that was the choice that back then, especially for a woman, and they make a bunch of very like, you know, right on points about that. But there's a moment where the extreme hottie, the Duke, he is back on his lands in Hastings. He's the Duke of Hastings. He's on these lands. He's wandering around. People are tugging the forelock, my lord, and it's all this. And someone casually mentions that his steward, the lad who runs the lands when he's away gallivanting, had tripled the rent on these poor people. And I'm not joking, I nearly picked up the telly and threw it out the window. Because I was like, who is he increasing the rent on, right?
Yeah.
Normal people. And it's like, okay, I know it's not. We're not here. We're not watching a historical but it got me that the injustice of it, the sheer, like, the fact that they get to play dress up, and have their adventure and
Yeah.
have the swooning moments and the parties. And there's an absolutely awful moment where they have a dance, right?
Mm.
And there's a portrait of them, you
Oh
know,
yeah.
there. And it's just like, it's so fucking tacky. Like, and you're going, oh, okay, you know, and then they have all this, and there's a big rainstorm, and it's going to ruin their painting, but they don't care because they're rich.
Yeah.
And you're like, yeah, I think the fact that it was so easy to gloss over the injustice of it.
And that it was a footnote rather than a focus.
Yeah, and he just kind of went, okay, he just accepted it. And there's another moment where the Duchess, the new Duchess, pardons a pig. Or no, she doesn't pardon a pig, that's the point. Or choose a favorite pig. If there's something about pig.
She's meant
Anyway,
to choose
she
a
pisses
favorite
off
pig. She's meant to choose a favorite pig, and
Right.
and that will get slaughtered. But she says
Yes.
no, none of
I
them can
like
get
them all.
slaughtered. La
Yes,
la la.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it turns out there's a massive public procurement problem because
Yeah.
she was going to award, by so doing, she would award the production of bacon or something
Yeah.
to other people. Again, the casualness with which this could happen. She could ruin this pig farmer life, you know? And she's like, why don't people like me? And you're like, it's like that because you're wrecking their lives with your sheer incompetence. So I, to be fair to her, I think she does fix it in the end. But yeah, I think I found myself primed beyond belief to truly, viscerally hate this show. And as I'm saying it to you now, I'm fucking annoyed. Like, I'm really annoyed, you know?
And I think, but that's really important. I think there's a lot to be said about that, apart from the minutiae and the details within it. But the context within which you consume any culture or any book or film of that is so important, you know, that, as you said, the way you're primed. It's funny because I told Jenny we were talking about this, and I said, oh, about the steward raising the rent. She went, yeah, but then the Duke was going to try and reduce the rents.
No, so Elka said that as well. He was like, oh, I must try to reduce that, but then he doesn't.
No, he has to go and frolic in the fields and.
Oh, he's in there working. You know, like working means staring at paper, but he doesn't actually reduce the rents.
No,
he goes, you know.
He wouldn't have as much of the crack. We see, the thing is, so this show, have you ever seen? Sorry, have you ever heard of Gossip Girl?
I've heard of it, but I've never seen it.
So the premise of this is that it's in upstate New York, not upstate, sorry, Upper East Side New York, real rich people, and there is somebody blogging called Gossip Girl who comments on everyone's life. So it's exactly like Lady Whistledown, who in this show there is a scandal paper that goes around who's talking about people's lives. So that's why I went, oh my god, this is Gossip Girl, but in is Georgian England? I don't. Well, it was made up. It wasn't a real period of time because.
Oh, so unfortunately, it's actually set in the early 1800s.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is, but it's still not a realistic because of, as you said, the racial stuff. But it's funny.
There's a further unrealism. Sorry,
okay, go on.
You there. My mother-in-law watched Bridgerton, and she said, you know, I just couldn't believe it. And I said, what couldn't you believe? She says, the big shot, you know, the establishing shot of Bridgerton House. There's begonias. And they're always in season all year round. She's like, that's ridiculous. It's ridiculous, Steve. It's ridiculous. I was like, there's something to not like in this for everyone. But anyway, go on. Go on.
Oh, but come on. It's only the summer season, though. Hang on. It's not the whole year round.
Well, apparently there are moments where they cut to the house in various times.
Oh, I get you. Other times of the year. Right. Yeah. Okay. Look, I am not a Bridgerton apologist. Can I be clear?
I have to say, I think I hopefully said this. I did not set out to deliberately dislike this. I was like, this will calm me down. This will just relax my relax the cax because I was so annoyed about the whole.
But isn't it
Um,
this? And I
yeah.
think this is what is awkward about justice. This is what awkward about all these things is. It's really easy and nice to watch things about rich people with all their money having the crack,
Mm.
especially when it's not your own experience of life necessarily. Even though I'm very comfortable and happy in life, and I want for nothing, but I don't live the life of Upper East Siders and Gossip Girl or the people back in the day. And we're drawn to that. We're drawn to watch people
Yeah,
who've more than us. It's
of
fantasy,
course.
it's escapism.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, what gets lost in that is, if you're the person who goes, well, in the family, people are like, oh, shut up. I want to watch Bridgerton. I want to just have, I don't want to be
I
thinking of
know.
anything else.
I know. I know.
But wouldn't it be like the importance of creating culture that educates and informs and entertains, is
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
funny, not this isn't exactly a segue trying to make myself look good or something, but in 2014, I was in a show called The Unlucky Cabin Boy.
Okay.
This is interesting about the stuff you've been talking about, and touches on a couple of points, but it was written by Mike Finn, a local playwright, and my brother David, who does the music for this podcast. We're in a band.
I love the music for this podcast, by the way. I was so happy to approve it. It's my favorite podcast opening music. Thank you so much
Well,
to the creators. Very, very, very good. Very good.
trying to
Creators.
sort out what happened a couple of episodes when Stephen didn't know we'd music. He goes, yeah. So I'm in a band with David called the Brad Pitt Light Orchestra. So we performed in this show on stage, and we were acting in it, and we were playing songs. But it was the story of Patrick O'Brien, a 15-year-old cabin boy who went from Thomondgate to Newfoundland, and on the way back, the boat hit a storm. They were all adrift, and ultimately, they drew lots between the cabin boys of who to eat,
Yes.
and they ate him. So it's lots of jazz hands, lots of tap dancing. Not really at all. It was a great show though, really great, dark and educational, but that wasn't the point of it. It was a big drama musical. But there was a character in it at the beginning, and the ship was called the Francis Spate. And that was the name of the merchant who owned it. And
Right.
if you had grown up in Limerick, in the 80s, there was a supermarket called Spates. It's on the site where there's now a new Dunn's on Henry Street.
Gotcha.
But Spates was just this name you knew. Now, the family had long died out, but
Yeah.
the name had carried on. But Francis Spate was quoted, so this happened in 1835, the cabin boy. But years later, when Mike Finn was doing research on this, he read letters from Francis Spate, who went on about how great the famine was for just sorting out getting people off the land and helping just to make everything easier. And this was, an Irish absentee landlord, but
Yeah.
he wasn't absentee necessarily. I think he lived in Ireland, but
many of them did, right? I mean,
yeah.
Lord Leitrim, for example, like half the year lived on the ancestral lands, just lived in his gaff. The other 6 months of the year was in London, having the season.
The season, following the season. The Pecunious are in season all year round.
Spawn. Yeah.
But this is the thing that I suppose, even reading this letter from this man in whatever 1855 or whatever, going, oh, wasn't famine great? Oh, and that's the attitude. And then you that versus Barteringtons, who were trying to mine people. But yeah, I just thought it'd be fun to start the year with a bit of a reflection on on Christmas TV.
Yeah.
And
I think the main thing is like you shouldn't take this too seriously. It's not designed to be a serious piece of anything, right? It's not. And if you're looking to take offense at something, you'll find it.
Yeah.
And I don't sit down to with a glass of wine over Christmas to get annoyed at the telly that's being shoved in my face. That's not what I'm there to do.
Yeah.
But what happened was I found it very difficult to control my emotions about this. I couldn't kind of calm down about it, if that makes any sense, because First off, because I'm very alive to policy failures, right? Like policy is when the government acts on your behalf to do something, like roll out a vaccine. And can you just imagine if they went, yeah, the vaccine, we're just not going to send it to Limerick. Just not going to do it.
Yeah.
Why? It's a bit too expensive. Just not going to do it. You have to remember, like the people who were most affected by this, they were British citizens, right? They were citizens, or subject. In fact, they were subjects. And I think that the television that I really want to watch, or like the books I want to read.
Hello.
Oh, sorry about that.
That's okay. I left it recording. He's back, Eric, when you're listening to this. So what you were just saying when it cut out was like, I like the books I read, the films I watch to be, and it stopped. So if you want to give that sentence again, might be a handy pickup for Eric.
Right.
Do you remember what you said?
Not a fucking clue. Okay.
Well, I think you were saying you don't want to get angry necessarily, but you want the books you read and
yeah. Okay. So I think okay, here we go. I want the books I read to, in a certain sense, have an eye towards colonialism. I want them to understand that this thing happened. And that's actually the reason that Bridgerton can do what it does, because it doesn't actually have an eye to colonialism. It doesn't actually understand it in any way. None of the writers clearly had a clue about what happened. This is an American produced show, obviously. The kind of the view, if you like, of colonialism wasn't there, right? Or if it was, the notion was it wasn't important enough to display in the show, right? Because that's not what the show is about. The show is about beautiful people having fun, and it's not there to give you an education about colonialism, right? It's there to do something else. Now, sometimes you can have aspects of a film that they're just nods, little nods, very good example in the new Wonder Woman film, which I really enjoyed. Actually, lots of people haven't, but I loved it.
It's the 1984 one.
1984, yeah.
I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, it's well worth going. It's a different experience in the cinema. My God, like it's sort of like as if there's been a zombie disaster and you're the only people. The atmosphere is not there, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But anyway, in the show, one of the lead character, she meets another woman, and who can't walk in high heels, and she drops them all. She drops some papers that she's been holding. She picks up the papers. It's just, oh God, I'm scientists shouldn't wear high heels. And Wonder Woman said, well, some do. And it's just a real nod. It's a real nod to say, like that. They very intentionally give her that phrase to show. Sometimes wear high heels, some don't. It's grand, right? There's a nod to kind of open arm feminism and pluralism in that simple phrase. And they don't make a big deal about it because that's not what this fucking show is about. No. This show is about a superhero beating the crap out of evil people, right?
Yeah,
that's fundamentally what it's about. But you can wrap loads of different messages around it if you like. But sometimes you can make these nods to, wouldn't it be better? Wouldn't it be nicer?
There was one nod in Bridgerton. I just remember now, where one of the characters is trying to unmask this gossip columnist as such. And she's studying and following people. And basically she follows one of the servants into her room and goes, "You're Lady Whistledown, aren't you? You're the one who's spreading all this stuff." And your one the servant goes, "Are you?" Starts laughing her head off and goes, "Do you
Yeah.
think servants have time
Time.
to do anything other than their jobs? Do you think we've time to write and print up papers? Are you off your rocker?" And it was this lovely little moment of, "Look,
Yeah.
darling, this is one of you. We don't
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
don't know, we don't care. Well, we might
Yeah.
care, we might be kind of fascinated, but we don't have time to be doing this." And I just thought that was
Yeah.
a fun little nod to the class system, not the colonial stuff, but the
Yeah.
class
Yeah.
system.
Yeah. But I think I was saying as well that, like, in my teaching this year, I'm really going to make a serious effort to describe some of these kind of colonial impulses, and they come about in weird places. Like, I'm teaching a thing called machine learning in economics, so it's about how we learn from how we can build models that learn from new data as they come in.
Okay, yeah.
And so but the issue is, which models do you choose, which data do you choose, and how do you make the inferences from the data? So
Yeah.
I'm just designing the course at the moment, but what I'm going to have is I'm going to have the students try to get an inference from the data that doesn't include the obvious thing, which is that the people involved are slaves, right?
Oh,
And
very
then I'm going to add in another variable, which shows if you account for the actual presence of a colonial power, it's explained in a totally different way to show them, listen, if you don't take account of this, you're not getting the full story. There's a thing in econometrics, which is a statistical study of economic variables, I'll call the error term. And when you don't have all the information, the error term is massive. And so not having the fact that this is a colonial situation controlled for, the error term's huge.
yeah.
And so it's how
Yeah.
can you get how you if you don't have all of the data, if you don't understand the institutional context properly, then by definition you're going to make the wrong inference and your error is going to be huge. And that, for me, like that was sort of what the problem that Bridgerton had for me. It was like, it's like this, these two variables,
Mhm.
but like they were missing this massive part of the story, which is like the only reason the error term was massive. The only reason these people were able to have this wonderful life was their enormous expropriation of hundreds of thousands of people's efforts and labor. And remember, they live in a world of subsistence farmers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Industrial revolution is just kicking off. There's a beautiful moment of actually where the lead character sees an electric light for the first time.
Yes.
A
Yeah.
little
Yeah.
nod to that. You're like, she's like, "Ooh, this is never gonna, kick off or whatever." And that we haven't gotten into the moment where the average punter can expect to eat well all the time, and yet these people can live like this. It's just it just doesn't sit with me, like,
Yeah.
and I
100%.
don't think it needs to necessarily, right? I don't think, like, again, I didn't go out to be upset by this or enraged by this, but I am.
Yeah. But here's
I
the
am, and I'm
thing.
going to do something about it.
This is why we talk about stuff, Stephen, because sometimes these things are silently there, or they're noodling away, or people are like, "Oh, get over it, just enjoy a show." And it's like, well, it's important that we have these conversations, because I'll be
Yeah,
honest, I know when I was traveling a number of years ago, I kept meeting people from the UK who were traveling the world, and were in Vietnam, or in Thailand, but they did not know that I was not British.
yep,
And that when there is a big gap in education, and a lot of people in the UK are not taught their own history.
yeah,
And not only that, these shows glamorize and romanticize, enslavement
yeah,
and this stuff. And I think, and I'm not the fist wagging anger thing at all. It's just, I think it's very important that we every so often go,
yeah,
please can we acknowledge this, or else it does get erased. It does get erased,
yeah,
and things get lost in memory, and we all prefer the sexy shiny show than the hard-hitting documentaries, let's face it.
yeah.
But I do think there is space for sexy shiny shows
Oh
that
my God,
also
yeah,
are well researched, and
mm.
and tell good stories.
Yeah, and I don't think you don't need to have it be ultra woke, right? And just be like, oh, and everything else. But clearly the show is trying to do some of that, right?
It
But I
does. Yeah.
mean, I don't want to place too much weight on this thing's shoulders. It's a crayon drawing,
Yes, it
like, I
is.
mean,
It is.
it's not, it's not the be all and the end all. But what it certainly is for me, anyway, it was just a wake up call that I wasn't expecting to have in any
Mm.
necessary sense, and it certainly wasn't something where I was like, yeah, I wasn't out. I think I've said this. I wasn't out to get annoyed. Like I really was just sitting there going, this
You
will
weren't.
chill me out,
You weren't sitting there
and
with
it did not.
your
You
arms
know,
folded, waiting to get angry. you know. Yeah.
this is it. No, this is it. No, quite the opposite. I was sitting back going, this is gonna be grand.
Yeah.
And by the end of it, I was actually like, I'm going to throw my telly out the window.
Yeah.
I was so annoyed with them all. Yeah.
Well,
And I wanted to stop. Well, that's another thing. Yeah, I'm sure there's people listening to this going, why did you watch the fucking thing to the end? And the answer is because I'm married. And my wife, I was just sitting there muttering, and my wife has a series of strategies to ignore all of my random stuff. Yeah, I was actually I found myself, I spent most of Bridgerton reading Barack Obama's autobiography, Promised Land. And every so often I'd look back up and get enraged and put the head back down again.
and you see there's the thing, one person in power, a person of color in power does not fix an entire society.
No.
And
No,
another
no.
thing. Yeah. So listen,
Yeah.
on that note, I think I probably should let you go. Your internet is threatening to drop.
Not ideal, yeah.
But it's very lovely to be talking to you again, Stephen.
You too. You too.
And I look forward to next week, and as we continue into 21 and our time of recovery.
Yep, it's gonna be great.
Listen, have a good one and happy New Year to you.